All right, so I mentioned that this using system is no longer needed. And JetBrains will actually tell you using directive is not required by the code and can be safely removed. So if we remove this and we go ahead and run this, everything will work exactly the same way. You still get hello world printed out to the screen without that using system. So why do we need to include that? Well, that's kind of a more historical thing. Up until about C Sharp, or prior to C Sharp 10, you had to include that. But with C Sharp 10, they added something known as implicit usings. So if we look at our file here, we right click on it, go to edit, and then we edit the hello world.cs project file. This is an XML file with a number of settings here. And so we'll have the project here, or property groups. This is what it's going to output. This is our target framework, which is .NET or .NET 6.0. Implicit usings is enabled, and nullable is enabled. Those are the only other options which are set. If we set this to disable, save this file with Control S, immediately notice that we get a red underline on program.cs and program.cs over here. We get a red underline there. We go over here and look to see what's happening. Our console suddenly now complains. Import system.console and other missing references. So it automatically detects that, hey, you're trying to use console. We don't know where console is. Do you want us to import it? And in fact, if we try to run this, we will get a program.cs CS0103. The name console does not exist in the current context. So we have to give it the context. And so this using system is similar to using a namespace in C++. You are adding that namespace into your program. This is adding the system namespace into our program, so we no longer have to append system dot or prepend system dot to each of these lines. So using system, if we do that, notice everything works. In some code, you may see that people will put system dot there. That will function the same way. The downside is if you need to write another line, system.console hello again, you have to add this system dot there. Otherwise, well, obviously it won't work. To get around that, you just add the system namespace. This is also case sensitive. Uppercase S there, uppercase S there, uppercase C. You get used to it after a while. Notice that works. And notice that this is saying qualifier is redundant and using directive is not required by the code and can be safely removed. That's because we have everything which is saying system dot. If we remove one, now suddenly that is required, but this is redundant since, well, we're already using it. That is this implicit usings, and that may or may not be in the project file when you create it. It is in there when you create a C Sharp 10, but it isn't there when you create C Sharp or versions using other C Sharp versions. We can also change our version of C Sharp. Let's go ahead and set this back to enable. Save this. If we right click on this, go to properties, here's where we can choose our language version. And these are all the different versions that are supported. It will default to C Sharp 10.0. That's the latest version at this point. C Sharp 11 is in preview, if I remember correctly. But you can go all the way down to C Sharp 3. You can choose various versions in between. So let's go ahead and choose C Sharp 9 and hit OK. So with C Sharp 9, if we run this, notice that we're getting feature global using directive is not available in C Sharp 9. Please use language version 10 or greater. That's because our project file, even though this language version now says 9, our project file still has this implicit usings enable. So if we set this to disable, we can still add that in there. It's just going to ignore it if it's not supported by the language. Notice that everything works, but again, because we got rid of this implicit usings, we have to make sure that we have using system, or we add system dot in front of each of these lines here. This language version can go to whatever you want. For this class, I'm going to go ahead and do everything with C# 10. I will point out the differences from the historical versions and what has changed from some of it, but we'll do everything with C# 10, and I'm going to go ahead and just use implicit using set to enable. I will still add this using at the top there, even if it's not required, just for historical sake, but you do not have to do this using system since it's implicitly added.